Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all here. New people and the people that attended our last workshops. My name is Oz from the Heinrich Böll Foundation, and I would like to welcome you all to this workshop on the smart mobility and sustainable development. I would like to already get started. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Steffen Hagemann, the director of the Israeli office of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, to say a few words, and then we will get started.
Yeah, thank you, Oz. Good morning, everybody. Welcome here at the workshop today, Making Smart Mobility Sustainable, Perspectives from Germany and Israel. A special welcome also to Felix Creutzig from the Mercator Research Institute in Berlin, who authored the policy paper, which was sent around yesterday, and who will present his findings today. And also a special welcome to Julius Jöhrens from ifeu, who also joins us from Germany today. It's really a pleasure again and an honor to welcome such a group of distinguished and also policy relevant actors. My name is Steffen Hagemann. I'm head of the Heinrich Böll Foundation in Tel Aviv. For those of you who are not yet familiar with us, the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung is the German Green Foundation. We are an independent, non-profit organization striving to promote environmental justice and sustainable development, gender equality, and democratic participation. Moreover, the Heinrich Böll Foundation is an international green network which promotes, among other things, social ecological transformation strategies in order to shift to a carbon neutral net zero economy and to avoid by doing so the devastating effects of climate change. And with our work and with this workshop in particular, we would like to initiate a dialogue and a mutual learning process between Germany and Israel. As also already said, this event today is the concluding workshop of a series of workshops discussing this transformation. And today we will discuss a particularly important topic, the future of mobility. We all have learned by now that the challenge of decarbonization cannot be realized by making just a couple of adjustments to the energy industry, but it will need a transformation also in industrial production, in building efficiency, and especially vehicle traffic. While many sectors in Germany have seen major emission reductions in recent years, the transport sector, which accounts for almost 1/5 of greenhouse gas emissions, has shown even a slight increase in some of the last years. And it is therefore a shared challenge of Germany and Israel to reduce traffic and to introduce a systemic approach to sustainable transport. In 2018, Felix already participated in a workshop of the Heinrich Böll Foundation on smart mobility. And one key takeaway, which I very vividly remember, was that smart mobility is not necessarily sustainable mobility. And we will follow up on that point today and discuss how this gap can be addressed. Last but not least, I would like to thank all of our partners, the Ministry of Environmental Protection, the IPPI, and the German Embassy for their support. A special thank you to Barbara Seimetz, who is on vacation and who can't join us today. She is responsible for the Climate Fund project at the Embassy and who greatly contributed to making these workshops a success. So I'm really happy that we as the Heinrich Böll Foundation can make a small contribution to the debate here in Israel. And I wish all of us a very productive and inspiring workshop.
Thank you very much, Steffen, for these words. Now I would like to hand over to Polina from IPPI to say a few words.
Yes, thank you, Oz, and good morning, everybody. On behalf of the Israel Public Policy Institute, I am very happy to welcome you at today's workshop on the topic of smart mobility and the decarbonization of the transport sector. For those who are joining us for the first time, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Polina Garaev. I'm the programs manager here at IPPI, which is an independent nonprofit think and do tank working at the intersection of society, technology, and the environment with the goal of understanding, guiding, and advancing the transformation process of our societies towards a sustainable and democratic future. Working with a global network of actors from government, academia, and civil society We conduct interdisciplinary research and catalyze fresh thinking on some of the main challenges facing our societies. As part of our work, we regularly create formats of exchange of views and best practices between policy professionals from Israel and abroad that serve to foster learning processes as well as the formulation of relevant policy-oriented solutions. Our experts workshop today is a good example of such a format, offering researchers and practitioners from Israel and Germany the opportunity to come together and exchange know-how and perspectives and deliberate on potential strategies and approaches on how to tackle the grand challenge of our time, which is climate change. So after examining the issues of carbon pricing and of course climate legislation in our previous events, our workshop today sets out to look closer at the topic of smart mobility within the context of the decarbonization of the transportation sector, which is sometimes dubbed as the problem child of climate change mitigation efforts. So at a time when global emissions need to be going down, transport emissions are on the rise, with the improvements in vehicle efficiency more often than upset by a greater overall volume of travel. Transport emissions, which primarily involve road, rail, air, and marine transportation, account for over 24% of global CO2 emissions in 2016. They are also expected to grow at a faster rate than that of any other sector, posing a major challenge to efforts to meet the emissions reduction targets set forth in the Paris Agreement. Indeed, it is high time to revolutionize the world of transportation, to phase out fossil fuel-based modes of transportation and introduce clean, smart, and efficient ways to move around people and goods. In this context, smart mobility has often been mentioned as a popular buzzword in both Israel and Germany, encompassing a wide array of innovative initiatives in the field of transportation, many of which carry the promise of promoting efforts to reduce greenhouse emissions. Yet while smart mobility has the potential to play a key role in climate change mitigation, evidence suggests that smart doesn't automatically translate into sustainable. It is therefore necessary to think of how to leverage the potential of new technologies and smart mobility in a way that fully capitalizes on their potential to drive forward the decarbonization of the transport sector. Germany and Israel, an automotive and innovation leaders respectively, can greatly benefit from increasing dialogue and exchange of best practices on this topic. We strongly believe that today's workshop, where we will explore and discuss the role of technology in driving forward the decarbonization of the transport sector, will contribute to a more nuanced understanding of the conditions required to capitalize on the potential of technology in driving forward the transition process to a zero carbon economy in Israel, Germany, and of course beyond. I would also like to thank all the presenters and the panelists in joining us and sharing our commitments to this issue, and especially to Felix Creutzig for his insightful paper, which will surely contribute to this and all future debates on the subject. I would also like to thank Amir Zalzberg from the Ministry of Environmental Protection for his help in planning and executing this workshop, and of course to the Heinrich Böll Foundation, Tel Aviv, for being a close and trusted partner and for their support of our work. Finally, I would like to thank the German Climate Fund, represented by the German Embassy in Israel, and especially to the Science Attaché, Barbara Zeimetz, which unfortunately could not be with us today, but did make this project possible. I wish you all an interesting and enriching workshop.
Great. Thank you very much, Polina. Amir from the Ministry of Environmental Protection is our partner in organizing this workshop. Amir, please.
Hi, good morning to everyone. So happy to see that many people have joined us for this workshop. On behalf of the Ministry of Environmental Protection, I wish to welcome you all. First, I would like to thank the IPPI, the Israel Public Policy Institute, the Heinrich Böll Foundation, the German Climate Fund, and the German Embassy in Israel for initiating this timely and highly valuable project. I think that this project allows us to facilitate a platform to exchange some knowledge, to do some networking between German and Israeli environmental policy experts. The project's workshop and papers, policy papers, have already been very helpful for us to drive the transition to a low carbon economy in Israel. We are currently now, these days, working on climate law. We're working on carbon tax, which were the topics of the last two workshops. So it's very, very relevant and on time for us. And we look forward to continue this cooperation in the future. When I look at the agenda for today, it reminds me very much of a discussion we had, and actually we still have, regarding how to incentivize alternative propulsion systems for road vehicles in Israel. Many years the government gave tax incentives for hybrids and EVs just because they are hybrids or just because they are EVs. And the incentives were, actually they still are, much larger than the environmental benefits that is caused due to the use of this type of vehicles. And we had it very apparent when we had some very large and hybrid vehicles like SUVs that are actually more polluting than a small mini vehicle, and they had this large tax incentive. So the policy that we decided to set, at least on the long term, is based on the environmental performance of the vehicle, actually what comes out of its exhaust. And only on the short term, we think that it is sometimes smart to give incentives which are larger than the environmental benefit, and only if on the long term this type of technology will give the society in Israel some benefits. And I think this is very much the case today for smart transportation. And when we look at smart transportation today, we have to look at it in the same way and to see what are the actual benefits of it, if it's just technology or if there are environmental benefits or other benefits for the society. And our policy should be based on this type of decisions. So I'm sure we will learn a lot today in this seminar, and I wish you all a fruitful seminar, and I hope that this workshop will help us to promote a better policy. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Amir, for these kind words. We are also very excited about this cooperation and about also about the partnership with you, which was very beneficial, and we hope that we can take it forward in the future. So a quick hello also from my side. Again, my name is Oz. I'm the head of the German-Israeli Dialogue Program at the Heinrich Böll Foundation in Israel. One central element of the work in this program is to create channels and platforms for knowledge exchange and cooperation between policy professionals in Israel and in Germany, as exemplified in today's workshop. This event is taking place, as was mentioned before, as part of a broader project titled Shaping the Transition to a Low Carbon Economy, Perspectives from Israel and Germany. It's an initiative of IPPI with us together, and it's carried in partnership with the Ministry of Environmental Protection and the German Embassy in Israel. By creating this platform for exchange of knowledge and best practices between sustainability experts from both countries, the aim of this project is to provide a systematic exploration of decarbonization strategies, which was started already last year, to reflect on existing gaps in national frameworks, and also generate actionable insights into various dimensions of this transition process. This year, the focus of the project has been on three issue areas, as mentioned by Amir. It's on the effects of carbon tax on the public. So who will be affected and in what way by the implementation of a carbon price? The second one was about the design of a climate law and how exactly it should be implemented and with which stakeholders. And this we had just recently. And today's workshop is the last workshop. It focuses, as also mentioned by Polina and Steffen, on the potential of smart mobility to support the decarbonization of the transport sector, which is one of the more challenging sectors when we're looking at decarbonization of our economy. The project entails execution of these 3 experts workshops and also the publication of 3 policy papers. We will be happy to disseminate all of these policy papers around once we are finished with today's workshop. The paper, which will be shortly presented by Felix Creutzig, provides a very illuminating, critical but constructive assessment of the potential of various smart mobility solutions to promote the decarbonization of the transport sector, showing what was said, that smart can but not necessarily have to mean sustainable. It's very helpful in that it breaks down and shows per mode of transportation, which is under the umbrella of smart mobility, how it performs. So I very much enjoyed it, and I look forward to hearing Felix's presentation. We hope that the recommendations, the concrete recommendation that it entails, will serve as a guide for policymakers and governments that are interested in harnessing the potential of smart mobility to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Israel, but also beyond Israel. So thank you very much, Felix, for your hard work and, as always, excellent cooperation around the preparation of this policy paper. I want to also thank the other partners mentioned before in supporting this important project. Let's do a quick rundown of today's program. We have 2 or 3 parts, depends on how you look at it. The first one will entail 2 presentations by Felix Creutzig and Julius Jöhrens from IPPI, which is the Institute for Environmental Research and Energy in Heidelberg. And both presentations will essentially look at the role and importance of governance and public policy in navigating the nexus of technology and transportation in the context of decarbonizing the transport sector. Afterwards, we will have a look into the Israeli situation, where we will have 2 presentations, one by Daniel Zucker from the National Smart Mobility Initiative in the Israel Prime Minister's office. He will present Israel's national strategy and vision in the context of smart mobility. And Hilla Haddad from Netivei Israel, the national transport infrastructure company. She will also provide an overview of their main projects and how these play into the company's broader vision for the future of mobility in Israel. Finally, Eran Shriker from the Ministry of Environmental Protection will present the results and lessons from the ministry's project on shared electric vehicles in Haifa and Netanya, and how this project performed. The final part of this workshop will provide space for all participants to reflect on the input presented and discuss the way forward. So this is not a conference in the sense that we have presenters and an audience, but rather everybody here in this virtual room is a key stakeholder in this debate. So we welcome you to actively participate, give your perspective, input from your respective professional background, so that we can have a fruitful discussion on really how to move forward from here. I wish you all a fruitful and beneficial workshop, and would now like to present Felix Creutzig briefly and give him the floor. So Felix, I will say a few words about you, who you are. Felix is Professor Felix Creutzig is head of the working group Land Use, Infrastructure and Transport at the Mercator Research Institute on Global Commons and Climate Change. He is also chair of Sustainability Economics at the Technical University in Berlin and a research fellow at the Israel Public Policy Institute. He was lead author of the IPCC's 5th assessment report and lead analyst of the Global Energy Assessment. So with that, Felix, I would like to hand it over to you so that you can present your presentation, your key insights from the report. The floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Can you see the slides? Thank you. First, let me apologize that I can't join all of the workshop because I'm catching a flight to Tel Aviv. And as you may know, there's only 1 flight a week by now. So I really have to catch that one. I thank you also for the invitation and for the very professional introduction. So Polina gave a very useful overview on the transport part of climate change mitigation. So you can join the IPCC now, I think. The challenge is indeed that we have these nice technologies coming, like new hybrid cars, electric cars, more efficient cars. We have smart mobility, but globally and also in rich countries where mitigation happens in other sectors, transport emissions are increasing. So there's just like something happening that doesn't fit very well. And if you look into one variable, which is car ownership, it becomes even more dramatic. We are currently globally at 1.4 billion cars. And because there's a strong correlation between economic growth and car ownership, and this is quite stable, we are on a trajectory to nearly 5 billion cars in 2050. 5 billion cars globally, and all of them, they're becoming larger. They're not becoming smaller, they're becoming larger. So we are heading into a future with, even if it's battery electric, very demanding on material resources, and obviously not improving mobility because streets will just be more congested. And so in a certain way, the smartness, maybe just to combat the worst effect of this increasing congestion by making it a little bit more efficient on the margin. So that's the template against which we operate. That said, there are of course very positive trends too. While hybrid cars sometimes are really less efficient and more polluting than conventional ICEs, but for battery electric cars, it's not true. And we are observing a rapid decline in battery cost. And the rapid decline in battery cost means that electric cars are on cost parity with conventional ICE cars in 2 or 3 years. And because the market is global, that will make a huge impact, and we will see a rapid transition to battery electric cars in the next 10 years. So that's a very positive development. But it does not necessarily relate to the smartness aspect. So let's get a little bit into that and what smart means and what it can do. And so like the title is a little bit pessimistic. It says, okay, it's not sustainable, and I really mean it. Like the current idea of smartness is not sustainable. But the good news is, and to put that at advance, like we can make use of smart mobility, of the smartness concept, to achieve high level of mobility with much less cars, with 5 million cars globally, for example. But we have to really make use of the smartness aspect. So that's the good part, but it requires more than only being smart. So I'm trying to get to the next slide. Here we are. So one of the key papers here is by Neu and Givoni 2018, who surveyed 117 transport entrepreneurs in Israel and asked them about their understanding of smart and sustainable technologies in transportation. And the key finding is that the tech sector identified smart ways closely with sustainable. So one of the thing is like basically because like there's a new fancy technology, and of course there is an indication that it's in a certain way better than what has been reformed. It means that also the new technologies are sustainable technologies. But importantly, of course, like if you say sustainable, you also have to measure it. You have to identify what it really means. What are the metrics here? And these metrics had not been identified very well. And there's also one key difference, and I will go a bit into that. There's a difference between marginal and systemic improvement. So sometimes the technology is better on an individual case base, but it's not better if you put it into a system of current operations. I will explain a bit what I really mean here. So I go directly into some quantifications here, and I will compare vehicle choices here, including shared mobility. So this is, and the important thing is that first, what kind of assessment is this? This is attributional life cycle analysis. And that means it's a comparison of per kilometer effect of a mode, of choosing a transport mode. It does not mean that it's like a comprehensive analysis of all effects, but it's an analysis of like what happens per kilometer use of one mode of transportation. And the key metric here is CO2 emissions. So I'm focusing purely here on CO2 emissions per kilometer. There are many, many more that are equally relevant, but just to get some focus and because it can be quite well measured. So the red line here is a bus, and the yellow line is a subway system. So basically what you really want to achieve, you want to be better than a subway system. That's a good benchmark, basically. If you're better than a subway system, you've achieved a lot. Then you are in a good playing field that you contribute something. So in the middle, you see the private car, the ICE, the high bar, and you can see that next to it is a BEV, which is a battery electric vehicle, which is better. So that seems to work well. And let's start with one of the main observations. If you see that there are 3 different colors, the dark green and then the olive green and the blue. And the dark green is when there's only 1 passenger, and the blue one is when there are 4 passengers. And because here the measurement is greenhouse gas emissions per passenger, you can see that higher occupancy, like if there are more people inside the vehicle, that makes a huge difference. So even a very conventional car, if you have four people inside, it's better than a subway. Then there's another point. You can see that the ride sourcing appears to be slightly better than the private car. However, there's on the top right, there's a star. It's called dead heading. So what's dead heading here? Dead heading means that if a Uber taxi is looking for passengers and driving around, it's driving empty without passenger. And if you account for that, if you account for the emissions of searching for passengers, then the emissions are actually higher than a conventional car. So it's like a key benchmark here. Ride sourcing, which is Uber taxis, Lyft taxis, they don't contribute anything. They even make the situation worse. That's a first starting point. Let's go to the left side. There are individual micromobility modes, shared bikes and shared e-scooters. And there you can see that actually a shared e-scooter is worse than a bus system. And why is it like that? Why does a shared e-scooter perform so badly? It has a key problem of, it's actually, if you just look at the use phase of using an e-scooter, like say in Tel Aviv, it's quite good. But you have to charge it. So there are like delivery trucks who pick up e-scooters or organizations like logistics to charge it. And also, very importantly, it's the lifetime of e-scooters. They are basically disposed very quickly, like after 1 or 2 years. And then if you have such quick disposal rate, it means that the emissions that occur at the production of e-scooters actually quite bad and really hit the system. You don't have the logistics part, and you have a higher lifetime if you have a private e-scooter. That's why a private e-scooter performs so much better. And the same is true also for private bikes and shared bikes in comparison. Okay, that was one half of the story, but there's another part, and that's what I call shared pooled mobility. So shared pooled mobility makes use of the observation that we had before, that occupancy really matters. Like if you have more passengers in a bus, then you are in a really green zone. So here, like there are shared vans and shared minibuses, so like vehicles that carry 10 or 20 passengers, but that are not normal buses, but they're really flexible. So you can book them with your smartphone, and they have flexible routing. So you have a lot of convenience, like ride sourcing, but you have higher occupancy, and that means like also you have less greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see that even a conventional ICE then performs similar to a bus system, and of course battery electric systems are better here, and they are basically becoming competitive even like with e-scooters in this range. So that's the main message here, that if you have shared pooled mobility like Bubble is the system in Tel Aviv that goes into that direction. It doesn't have enough passengers, but I come to that in a second. So it doesn't have enough passengers, but this is the direction to go for. So like for the moment, I had focused on attributional life cycle analysis. So here I want to expand the view and look at systemic effects. And the key question that has to be asked is like, where are passengers coming from? So if people are changing their private car to like shared pooled mobility or something, this is really good news, because it means a reduction in emissions. But if they change from public transport or from bicycle transport, it's bad news because it increases emissions. And you can see that the current statistics suggest that actually a lot of people change from public transportation, especially for ride sourcing, but also for micro-mobility. So in a current view, there are a number of negative effects from the mode switching perspective. So like in one study, we concluded that shared mobility increases accessibility. So it makes really a mobility user perspective, it's very useful, but it even in aggregate, it does not contribute anything to sustainability of greenhouse gas emission reductions. So that's what you achieve when you go into case studies, for example, in Jakarta and in other cities. So it's more or less the same. If you go into like specific case studies, you'll see sometimes a little bit higher emissions, sometimes a little bit lower emissions, but in aggregate, you see that emissions stay constant if you have the shared mobility modes. By the way, you see number 63 slides down there. That's not true. You don't have to worry. It's 9 slides, so it's 3 more slides. So let me say something about barriers. So of course, like there's some perspective why it's not working so well. And people had been asked about why they don't take a shared car. And it's a lot of convenience reasons. So like it's like people like to keep their belongings in the car and they can't use it for shared mobility. It's a permanent availability and so on. So like I think one key conclusion is that like you really want to have it available. So like for us it's a key problem, for example, here in Berlin, that we like a good car sharing service, actually a stationary one, but the station is more than 400 or 500 meters away, which is too far basically, so we can't really use it. So otherwise we would totally just use that one. But on the other hand, that means we also use biking basically. So I think there are some barriers and they have to be addressed. It's not about convenience, but the good news also, it's like nothing fundamental. I mean, like these are things that can be addressed. This is nothing that it's really a no-go in terms of people switching to shared mobility. So let me come to the key problem perhaps, and that is that you want, of course, you want car sharing. It must be profitable. It's very clear. I mean, you can't like say like it's a nice mode of transportation and then it can't be financed. So it must be profitable. And for being profitable, it must have enough frequency. It must have enough users, so that the initial capital investment can pay off, and enough users are only in inner cities. That's perhaps the key problem of all. So this is a map of Hamburg, Cologne, and Frankfurt, and the indication of the zones in the cities that are profitable for shared mobility, because there's enough demand for that. And you can see that basically it's only inner cities. In Germany, it corresponds to 5% of population. And it's a key problem because like people in the inner city don't need it. There are so many other modes of transportation already available. So, I mean, of course, there's a small fragment, like you use cars then to go out to the countryside on the weekend or something and don't have a private car. That's useful, but it's not really like you don't mainstream it really. It's not mainstreaming because of these kind of economics, and I call it economics of density because we need them. So like basically the strategic direction to think about is like how to make shared mobility attractive for the suburbs. I think that should be faced as this key strategic question, both for business and for regulators. It's the same question, like how do you make shared mobility attractive for suburbs? We give like some directions, but I don't have the answer for that. So I think that's like a very interesting direction to think about. Let me just like make one more point here, and that is shared mobility will actually pay off also for the users. So if you book like car sharing, you pay for it. It looks like it's not cheap. But the thing is that people consistently underestimate the true cost of private car ownership by a huge margin. It's really impressive. So like this is a Nature paper just coming up this year. And you see the distribution of the cost, how people estimate the car cost in the gray bars. And the blue line is the actual cost. And you see that on the top left, you see that most users are below the blue bar. That means they underestimate the actual cost. It's not the fuel cost. So like the fuel cost is some relevant part, but it's often obviously not. And people are quite good in estimating what they pay at the gasoline station. But they misjudge depreciation, like really the value of buying a car, and then the depreciation value of car use. And they also misjudge repair cost and the tax and insurance cost here. And the main message is here that there's intransparency on the cost of using a private car, and just by making the cost transparent, the incentive will increase already to use other modes of transportation. So like, of course, cost is very relevant for people, but people misjudge their own cost of a private car. So because of different constellations of and how many money is paid here, if the costs are made transparent on a per kilometer basis, the system changes. It's one of the key directions to think about. Okay. Let me wrap up and give a few directions here. I mentioned a few points that I didn't do before in terms of like what are policy levers here. Like I think municipalities are key stakeholders here, and like they need data to regulate the system. And one starting point is they offer license to operate shared mobility in exchange for data. And some of you may remember, I presented together also with Daniel and the Prime Minister's Office and the IPPI last year a paper on actually a data platform of how this could go forward. Then another point is like you really want to go into the key variables that make a difference. And in micromobility, it's a lifetime of vehicles, a lifetime of e-scooters and a lifetime of shared bikes. So you want to actually first, perhaps you want to have transparency on that first. So you really want to learn from providers, like what's the lifetime of the vehicles of micromobility, and then perhaps look together with them how to increase the lifetime. So that because it makes a difference in greenhouse gas emissions. And then perhaps the most important thing is, so this is a figure down in the bottom, it's a figure of Helsinki. And it's a modeling study of shared mobility. And the idea is here, and they manage to serve the suburbs by shared mobility. I mean, Helsinki does it indeed anyway, because they have a lot of shared mobility offers. But this is a modeling study, and what they're basically saying is abolish the private car. And serve suburbs with shared mobility together with rail-based transportation. And the funny thing, what happens is that mobility is actually improving. So you would think that people would hate that they lose their private car, and probably some of them will hate it. But the key thing is that there's less congestion, there's no searching time for parking space, and the streets are free because there are no parked cars anymore. So like there are a lot of benefits to that, and it really improves mobility and accessibility. And I think that's the way forward. Actually, there's also a lot of value generation because you still get per kilometer, you get a lot of income from shared mobility services. So it's not like there's less value generation or something, but there's more. You offer the flexibility by shared mobility. And this is really like one key direction to think forward. Yeah, by this note, I leave it here. And yeah, I'm actually really working on this kind of topics. So like there will be perhaps also 1 or 2 follow-ups in the coming year, and I'm happy to stay in touch also on the larger picture here.
Thank you very much, Felix, for this great presentation. And I would like to stress that the policy paper that we sent around yesterday gives more in the findings that were presented here in more detail, but it's very it's a good read. You can take a lot from it, and it's a good paper. So it's worth the time and effort. Great. So thank you again, Felix, and of course we will continue working on this next year. So this is not this will not end here. And with that, I would like to open a quick Q&A session, and then afterwards we will go on to our next speakers. So Amir, maybe we will start with you.
Well, thank you very much. It was some surprising results, at least for me. And I would like to ask regarding the life cycle analysis results that you showed. Does it, where does it represent? Does it represent also the case of Israel, or does it represent other places? Because I think that if we can use this type of rank according to the life cycle greenhouse gas emission per person kilometer to determine the government incentives and the policy. So the question is, do you think it represents Israel well? And the other thing is that I did not see anything about e-bus, electric bus, city bus, because all comparisons were made to diesel buses. So if you could please say something about it. Thank you.
And maybe also before you ask a question, present yourselves quickly, because not everybody knows everybody. So Amir is head of the transportation department in the Ministry of Environmental Protection. Felix, do you want to already answer this question? And then we will.
Yeah, I think they're very important questions. So like the numbers that are presented are coming from an original study of the ITF, the International Transport Forum. And there are a number of variables underpinning the estimates. And depending on the input of the variables, the results are different. So I mentioned one key one in the lifetime of e-scooters, but there are others. So even there would not be a representative number for Israel, but because it already depends, like which part of Tel Aviv, like which e-scooter provider is it? Do they have exchange vehicles every year or every 3 years? I don't know, and perhaps the providers actually do it for different values. So, but I think what is helpful in principle, what you can do, you can say like these variables matter in terms of marginal greenhouse gas emissions, and this can be first, like you can get data on those, and then you can put marginal incentives on these variables. I think that's one way to think about it. So I don't think there would be one representative value even for Israel, but I think in general the values I took the average values of all kind of different combinations. I think they fit quite well. They are plus minus 10% in this direction. So I think they work as a first benchmark. But then you have to really gather individual data to make it more precise. And e-buses, so I mentioned at the second quantitative slide, I mentioned shared pooled mobility, and they have also battery electric vehicles was one of the variants of that. And you see that they actually improve by at least 40–50%. Of course, we have the life cycle issue that production of batteries is still quite greenhouse gas emission intensive, but nonetheless, they are much better. they're much better than IC or diesel buses. That's definitely a direction to go forward.
Thank you.
Amit, please.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm Amit. I work on environmental policy with the Ministry of Environmental Protection, with the EU, with others. I'm based in the Netherlands. I was wondering, Felix, you rightly pointed out that the great gains to be made are from the suburbs, the transitioning of suburban passengers to other modes of transit. But we know that in Israel, actually, one of the big shifts that happened in the past decade or so is that people in the suburbs switched to train in very large numbers. And the obstacles that we've been seeing is actually, in the final mile, right? So what happens between the train station and the workplaces and vice versa. And for that section of the trip, I'm not sure that shared mobility really provides the solution that we'd be looking for, relative to better public transport solutions or some of the other solutions that you've mentioned. So I was wondering how that sort of fits in with your theory of change for driving the emissions down.
Thanks. That's a very good question. Yeah, I think you make the right point. Like one of the key things that are also presented is that sometimes shared mobility actually replace public transport, and that's of course not the direction that you want to have. And that means that especially for train, like for high density demand of transportation, you really want to keep trains, because if you replace them with shared mobility, then you actually increase congestion on the roads, even if they are minibuses. So, and I'm not sure I precisely got your question in terms of shared mobility can serve as a feeder sometimes. That's one question, one direction. And the other question is whether it's always the most efficient sort of feeder, and whether you need that. And I'm not sure that there's a general answer to that. But I definitely would look into it, the possibility, because you really want to make transportation convenient, to also improve the share of the environmental modes.
Great. Amit, do you have any other follow-up questions on that?
No, I guess it just depends on the profile of the passengers that you want to, to switch. If it's passengers that are more likely to use shared transport, then fine. But if it's passengers that you could shift to, to public transport in the last mile, then maybe, it is preferable. So.
Yeah, I think, basically one can think of, you can't, the key thing is the high demand of individual motorized transport by cars. And you want to have a shift away from that. So that's one starting point to think about. And congestion charging, is always a difficult thing, but one of the other key problems that is really localized, and the problem is parking. So you have in inner cities, you have a parking problem. So I'm now talking about inner cities, but actually it has repercussions for the suburbs, because if there's commuting via private car into cities, then parking becomes a key issue. And what you want to have more space for people on streets, like for cafes, for walking, for cycling. So if you achieve that, then there's less availability of parking in inner cities, and then there's higher incentive to use different modes of transportation, also from the suburbs to the cities. And for that, you really want to provide very attractive offers. And in this constellation, shared mobility is part of the game.
Thank you, Felix. We have another question from Gil Yaakov.
Hi, Felix. I founded 15 Minutes, which is a public transport alliance in Israel, one of the leading organizations, and today I consult foundations mostly. First of all, I want to thank you for echoing the thoughts of civil society on the problems with shared mobility in terms of public transport. I think it's important to hear that from you as well. I have a follow-up question about the suburbs. You said you have some thoughts about how to incentivize, or what is the right policy and intervention by the regulators. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. because obviously in some suburbs, public transport is much harder to provide in terms of density or lack of density. And the other question, which I think that's the real problem and issue, is we have the picture, the image of the future we want to see. We have the current situation. We have all kinds of interests from the public sector. What would be the transition? How do you see the transition happening? Thank you.
Gil, big question, Felix. If you have any other questions, feel free to raise your hand or type in your questions in the chat. Felix.
Yeah, it's really difficult, and it's a key question. I tried to allude it to in my answer to before, but it's a catch-22, because in the current situation, if you offer shared mobility in the suburbs, it will be quite low occupancy. It won't be used much. It will be very costly. So you have to subsidize it a lot, and it might even compete with other modes of public transportation. So you really have a problem here if you just start with that. But I mean, the other perspective is that you see that if shared mobility becomes the preferred mode in the suburbs, then it becomes very efficient and outcompetes other modes, terms not only in efficiency, but also in convenience and in reduced congestion. But it's a systemic effect, so you don't achieve it at the beginning, but it could be going there. So the question is really how to transition there from the introduction where it's very costly, you have to subsidize it, and it doesn't achieve much. How do you go over there? And I mean, like I pointed to one measure in a very cheap measure actually, to just make the cost of private transportation transparent, like to change the cost system. For example, I mean, if cars are leased, or if you pay per kilometer for all of the car services, then you see the real cost of that. So like increasing cost transparency on car use would of course already help to incentivize the shift to other modes of transportation that are cheaper. That's one important direction. It doesn't cost anything in terms of just, you just have to improve the transparency. And the other thing is to think about parking management, because one of the key advantages of shared mobility is that you don't need on-street parking. I mean, shared mobility is using the street like for mobility, which is the useful thing, of course. And like parked cars are really useless. I mean, they're standing on the streets 23.5 hours a day, and they're blocking the street for everyone else. It's congestion in streets is mostly due to parked cars, not because of moving cars. And you don't see it because you always focus on the moving cars, but it's actually parked cars that are the problem here. And if you tackle this from the parked car problem, so you want to have reduced parking spaces and more space for other modes of mobility, then you automatically also increase the attractiveness of shared mobility. So this is like, I think, how to work on a catch-22 situation.
Yeah. I think the point about the parked cars is always it's counterintuitive, but once you hear it, then you realize that it's a big part of the problem. But it's true, I think, for every pedestrian or everybody that thinks you usually focus on the moving cars. You think about mobility and movement and not about just standing cars. So thanks for that. Are there any other follow-up questions by the people here? Otherwise, we would move to our next presenter to talk about tech neutrality. Okay, so I don't see any other raised hands or questions in the chat. So Felix, thank you very much for this input. We would love that you stay for as long as you can, but of course we realize that you have to catch a flight, so up to you. And otherwise we'll meet when you get to Tel Aviv and get out of quarantine. So thank you very much, as always, for this illuminating input. It's very helpful, and I'm sure it will be beneficial for everybody, all the relevant stakeholders in Israel. Great. All right, so having said that, I would like to move to our next presenter of the day, Julius Jöhrens, who heads the team for alternative drive technologies at ifeu, Institute in Heidelberg in Germany. His work focuses on designing policy instruments that can help low-carbon drive technologies into the mass market. In this context, he particularly investigates the technical and economic potential of different drive technologies in road transport, optimized infrastructure rollout, as well as decision-making processes in the transport industry. So, Julius, the floor is yours, and take it from here.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to speak at this forum here. Sorry, my voice is a little bit not so optimal today, but I hope I will get through. I'm going to talk about technology neutrality, which is a very intensively discussed topic, at least in Germany. And of course, I'm curious whether how this topic is also virulent in Israel. I will ask the question, is technology neutrality a smart choice towards sustainable transportation? What I will show you is mainly based on a joint project we did together with the UFZ in Leipzig with Paul Lehmann and his colleagues. And it's a project which was conducted on behalf of Agora Verkehrswende. I will briefly say some words about the challenge we are facing. I think we are all familiar with that. You see here the German in the transport sector, which in the past decade have not decreased. And we have a target to reduce the CO2 emissions by about 40% until 2030 within one decade. So this is quite ambitious, and the current forecasts with the measures that have been agreed so far, they indicate that we will definitely fail to meet this target. We have a huge challenge, and it consists actually of two parts. One part is the mobility transition, which was already, I think, described very well by Felix in his talk. I will not cover those aspects in my talk today, but on the energy transition in the transport sector. This is mainly about the question, which drive technology should we choose for which application? Let me briefly summarize the discussion we are having in Germany about those topics. So I think I would say 90% of stakeholders on the on the political level in transportation policy, they would agree to the only smart way to decarbonize transport is to be technology open or technology neutral. So this is a kind of headline where all people come together under it, but it's often not quite clear what exactly is meant by this. Maybe some people think it means we don't know what the future will bring in terms of technology. And others might think we don't want to distinguish between technologies in the regulation. Or we want to push all alternative technologies forward in parallel because we will need all. Or just the fact that we need more than one technology. Or maybe some people also think we want to select technologies that could also be an option. So it's a bit unclear, and in our study we wanted to shed some light on this terminology. And we distinguished essentially two different terms. The one is technology openness, that is Technologie-Offenheit in German. And this is a characteristic of the decision space. So it means if we are technology open, we have a level playing field between the different technologies. And the result in economic theory should be an efficient technology choice. So this is the characteristics of the decision space of the market, essentially. And on the other hand, we have the technology neutrality or technology specificity. And this is a characteristic of the regulation. If we set up a regulation, we can distinguish explicitly between different technologies, or we can make it technology neutral. And the assumption we normally have refers to the latter one, the technology neutrality. And this is often believed to be most efficient. So the hypothesis at this point is with technology neutrality, we can decarbonize the transport sector most efficiently. But this assumption or this statement, this belief is based on some assumptions, which we summarized in this work. So there are mainly three assumptions. The first is the information advantage of private actors. So the assumption is private actors, the decentral knowledge in the market is much better than the central knowledge we have on the side of the regulator. The second assumption is that we have a technology open decision space. So this refers to the first point I mentioned. The assumption is we have a level playing field between the technologies. And the third assumption is that we only have one single objective, that is decarbonization. We want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And this is the single objective. We can optimize everything onto this single objective. So what we did in the study is we challenged these assumptions. And we did this using the following question. First, the information question: to which extent is the regulator informed about the technology costs and the benefits, and also the respective development in the future? The second area is the decision space, the market characteristics. And the basic question in this field is, to what extent are technology choices in the market we have, to which extent are they distorted? And the third one is the question of policy objectives. Which contributions deliver the technology to other relevant policy objectives? Or are there maybe also misalignments and conflicts of interests between different policy objectives? And we went on and we chose a set of technologies in transportation we wanted to compare regarding these questions. And we chose technologies with a set of criteria. These are essentially three criteria. We said, okay, the technology should be able to make a strong contribution to decarbonization. That meant, in our definition, we wanted a greenhouse gas reduction of at least 80% for the technology. So things like, for example, the switch to methane, in the transport, LNG and CNG. This was not examined here because when we switch to the methane as a fuel and use fossil methane, we will only have CO2 reductions of maybe 20% over the whole life cycle. The second one is we want to have the volume potential for a large market. This mainly excluded then biofuels of the first generation because of the conflict between the food and fuel is problematic. And the third criterion we had, we only looked at technologies which are heading towards commercial readiness. So we used a minimum technology readiness level of 6 in this case, because it's about decarbonization on a quite short time frame. We want to reach 2030 climate targets with it. And out of this, we got a set of technologies which were essentially and we only looked at the road transport. I have to specify this here. We did not look at aviation or navigation. We only looked at road transport drive technologies, and we selected based on these criteria. We selected the combustion engine with synthetic fuels based on renewable energy. We selected battery electric vehicles. We selected fuel cell electric vehicles. We selected vehicles powered by electric road systems, for example, powered by a catenary line or inductive system in the ground. Yes, and I think this, and we considered hybrid technologies to a certain extent, the plug-in hybrid technology. And for each of these technologies, we investigated a quite big set of questions, and I can't go into detail because I only wanted to give a short input here. But some examples are for each technology, we investigated how uncertain is the future cost development. What can we say about costs in 2030, for example? Another one is to which extent does infrastructure exist for the technology already today? So this is a significant starting disadvantage, and it of course really distorts the decision space if you have no infrastructure for an incumbent technology. And a third example is how does the technology performs in terms of privacy energy efficiency? Because, for example, energy efficiency is also a political goal, and there is political, also quantitative targets, at least in Germany. Yeah, the technologies might perform differently in terms of this goal, regardless of their CO2 emissions. Okay, as I said, I will not go into details of this technology assessment here, just for the sake of time. But I would like to briefly summarize the results of this analysis. And key findings of this were, first, the technologies which can be used to attain the 2030 policy targets are essentially known today. So it's not that we need to be completely technology neutral to be also possible or to be capable of taking advantage of technologies which are not known today. This is very unlikely. So it's mainly known what we will need, and depending on the exact area of application, it may be known to a different extent. For example, for the segment of the passenger cars, it's quite obvious that in 2030 we will reach much of our target with the battery electric drivetrain, and that, for example, hydrogen passenger vehicles will definitely play a minor role. They might play a role, but they will play a minor role, and policy should take this into account. The second finding was the technology openness of the decision spaces is limited. So currently we do not have a level playing field, and it might be necessary for policy instruments to address these inequalities of the decision space, which would mean if you have a known disadvantage of a specific technology in the decision space, then it could be wise to address this disadvantage with your regulation, and this would of course be technology specific. Then third one was we definitely have multiple policy objectives, and it's also officially told by politicians that there are different goals connected to the different technologies. So, for example, with battery electric mobility, we have a national development plan in Germany, which sets about, I think, 6 different targets, like industry, politics, and air quality and energy efficiency, all different objectives beside of course the CO2 saving objective. This leads to the finding that strict technology neutrality is not reasonable from an economic point of view, if you consider these aspects. But a minimum degree of technology neutrality is in many cases reasonable, and it depends very much on the reason for the distortion of the decision space, for example, which kind of technology-specific instrument does make sense. I will shortly come to an end, but finally, I would like to summarize the main fields of climate policy action we identified in this project. And depending on this policy field, there may be a different degree of technology specificity or a technology neutrality, which is suitable. So first, regarding technology choice, we have to make a phase out of fossil fuels. This is what we called exnovation. And in this field, definitely mostly technology neutral instruments do make sense. So for example, this could be a CO2 pricing or an emission trading system, or anything which directly punishes CO2 emissions. Then as a second field, we have the rollout of the necessary infrastructure for the new technologies. And in this field, of course, we need technology specificity, because every technology might have different requirements there. Then we have the development and diffusion of low carbon technologies. This is the innovation aspect. So we need research and development of new technologies. And of course, we have to set priorities there. We can't do everything in the same intensity, but we have to decide and we have to look which is the probable technologic development, the potential of each technology, also on the time scale, and we have to set priorities. Infinite money. Then on top of this, we have the area of mobility behavior, which I don't want to go more into detail here, but I think an important point is also how can we enact regulation which reduces the mobility volume as a whole, so also the average price of the mobility is very likely to rise in the future, because it will be very difficult to maintain the same absolute mobility level for much more people and much denser cities in the future. And as a final point, we have to ensure the credibility of the political regulation. And this is, of course, really a cross-cutting issue. But in order to be really credible, it's also important that the technology, that the policy follows a long-term strategy and also a technology strategy, and does not only say we don't know anything about which technology will prevail in 10 years. Okay, I will come to an end, and this is my last slide here with some final policy implications. Of course, all of these fields of climate policy action should be addressed simultaneously, because we have very little time left and a low CO2 budget. We have to combine technology neutral and technology specific instruments for the reasons I just mentioned. And we have to make sure that if we are technology specific, these specific instruments, they fit to the economic rationale, to the reason for being specific, or to the problems we are addressing there. And of course, we have some real world hurdles, why some theoretic concepts might not work in reality. And we need, last but not least, really political courage, better second best than nothing. And I think we, in the past years, at least in Germany, we have seen very much hesitating politics. There's Attentismus in German. They all said, we don't know what the future will bring in terms of technology. We can't do anything. We have to wait. And I think this is really no more the strategy for coping with climate change. If you want to see some more details, then I can recommend this publication here, as I said, together with the colleagues of UFZ Leipzig. And it's also a summary available in English here. Thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Julius, for this very interesting presentation, which connects also to Felix's input about the role of governance and public policy and in navigating the technological investments and transformation of the transport sector. So I'm sure this is very helpful. If there are any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, Amir, I would be happy if you could say maybe a few words about the current status of the debate in Israel, because I think you mentioned that this is a conversation that is also being that is taking place in the Israeli context as well.
Yes, I think I mentioned in the beginning that we actually have the same discussion in Israel. I can relate to what Julius has just now showed, that what should you really incentivize? Do you incentivize the technology just because it's a new technology? And we have this big debate, and a lot of people do not, I think, they misunderstand the role of governments here, because many people come to us, for example, the Ministry of Environmental Protection, and they say that we should fight the increase of tax on certain technologies that appear to be green, to be more eco-friendly, but doesn't necessarily do it. So I think that the main lesson is to look at the environmental performance, of each one of the technologies. And this is what I mentioned earlier. When we look today at EVs and plug-in hybrids and hybrids, etc., and we're trying to realize how to incentivize them, and should we incentivize them, and what is the role of the governments. So for example, if we look at the hybrid, we have a very large incentives for hybrid vehicles, which caused Israel to be one of the leading countries with respect to the penetration rate of hybrid vehicles. Last year, 2019, 1 out of 5 cars, new cars that went on the road was a hybrid vehicle. And this is great on the one hand, but it caused the government to lose billions of shekels on the other hand, and not necessarily due to the right reasons. So we need to incentivize only those hybrid vehicles or vehicles that show good environmental performance. And I think this is a switch that we're doing now. It shouldn't be very fast. Each new technology needs the time, and we cannot just cut like it. But once you see that a technology that is grown mature and the environmental benefits can be quantified, so you should incentivize it based on the quantification of the environmental benefits. This is I think the leading aspect. That's it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Maybe one remark on this. The environmental effect is also often subject to sector coupling, and it's not easy to foresee, for example, in the case of hydrogen vehicles in the next years, which kind of hydrogen provision you will have, and what will be the life cycle CO2 footprint there. So the discussion at this point needs to be much about the supply we will probably have in the future, and supply which is also compatible with other needs in our energy system. And this is a very, very complex discussion, and it is often reduced just to the tailpipe emissions. And in terms of tailpipe emissions, for example, a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle and a battery vehicle will be just the same. But it's a huge difference in terms of energy efficiency.
Great. Amir, do you want to respond to this, or?
No, just a question. When you say there is a huge difference with respect to energy efficiency, can you please elaborate? What's the difference between a hydrogen fuel cell and an EV?
Yes, of course. Well, in the case of the fuel cell, you have about 50% energy losses in the vehicle when you convert the hydrogen to the power at the wheels. And in a battery vehicle, you have about 85% maybe of the energy you use. And also in the provision, if you generate the hydrogen from renewable power, you will only get about 70% of the renewable power in the form of hydrogen. So over the whole supply chain, you will have an efficiency of about, which is 2 to 3 times higher for the battery vehicle than for the hydrogen vehicle, if in both cases there is renewable electricity at the starting point. And this is really a big difference, because there will not be renewable energy in any amount, but it will be a scarce good also in the future.
And does this answer your question, Amir?
Yes, it has.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions to Julius about his presentation?
Yes, I want to ask a question, please.
Rafael, just so present yourself, and then.
Okay. Hello, my name is Rafael Fleischmann. I used to work in the Ministry of Environmental Protection in the Transport Division. Then I moved to the Ministry of Transport, and now I'm a PhD student. Also, I've been a IPPI fellow, a researcher last year. So that's me. And my question to Julius is regarding the role of the policymaker, of the regulator in incentivizing the technologies. At the same time, my question is how to invest on a infrastructure, which is a very big investments, a lot of money in this scenario of technology uncertainty. It's not only giving taxes. Sometimes the government has to create huge infrastructure, very expensive. So how do you maximize or how do you minimize the cost? Because you don't want to invest on infrastructure that will be obsolete after 5 years when the technology is proven to be not efficient. So what should the government do on those situations in your view?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We are facing this question in Germany at the moment for the heavy-duty trucks, especially. So in the for the passenger vehicles, most stakeholders now think, okay, it will be mostly battery, so we roll out charging infrastructure. But for the trucks, we have 3 technologies at the moment. And these are hydrogen fuel cell, battery electric, and the overhead catenary. So it's the ERS truck powered by the overhead catenary line. And
may I add you that in Israel also regarding heavy duty, also a natural gas is on the table here.
Okay.
So it's more complex even here. Yeah.
Okay, but you should be aware that with natural gas, you will only achieve about 20% of CO2 reduction.
I understand, but it is on the table. Yes.
Okay, but nevertheless, we have recently, there was recently published a strategy in Germany from the Transport Ministry how to take this decision for the heavy-duty trucks, and it will work like that in the following 3 to 4 years until 2025 about, we will have large pilots, and we will try to answer the question which technology will be most suitable for which application, and then we can really describe the fields of application, for example, on the backbone routes where we have a very big traffic density. There probably an ERS, the catenary lines will be most efficient, and then in the more the less densely populated areas, probably it might be more hydrogen, and this is the way these decisions will be taken, and I think it's a wise way, but we don't have much time, of course. We have now we will have some big pilots, not only like we have today for some kilometers, but maybe some 100 kilometers, and then we can take the decision which technology to roll out after year 2025. So this is one possible approach, but there may be also others.
Great. Rafael, do you want to follow up, or?
I think that that answers.
Yeah, great. All right, so are there any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. I put the link to the study, the summary of the study that Julius wrote together with Helmholtz, with the UFZ. This is the Environmental Policy or Environmental Research Institute of the Helmholtz Society. So you have the summary in English in the chat if you're interested in reading more in detail about Julius's presentation. So thank you very much, Julius, for this great presentation. And with that said, we will take a short break now, 10 minutes, and then we will reconvene and have a look how things are looking in Israel. So in terms of smart mobility and the vision for the future. So we will see you in 10 minutes. You can you can stay connected, just mute yourself and switch off the video. All right, we're back from the short break that we had. And we are now entering the second part of our workshop today, which will focus on the situation in Israel. Daniel Zucker is here with us. I will, Daniel, I think I will start presenting you, or should we wait a few more seconds until people have joined us, have come back? All right, so I will start presenting you. So our next presentation will be, as I said now, by Daniel Zucker, who is head of the local market implementation at the Smart Mobility Initiative at the Israeli Prime Minister's office. Daniel leads the initiative's efforts to promote the usage of both CNG and electric transportation, and coordinates the different, is responsible for coordination work between the different ministries in that framework. In addition, Daniel coordinates the progress of the Israeli National Plan for Smart Mobility, and he will present now an overview of Israel's strategy in terms of smart mobility. So, Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Oz. Thank you very much for having me here, and it's really nice to see all my colleagues and friends mainly from Israel, but some from Germany, and I hope we worked together with Felix in the past, and I really hope that we will be able to drink some beer in Tel Aviv soon after he will finish his quarantine. So as Oz said, I'm representing the Smart Mobility Initiative under the Israeli Prime Minister. The Smart Mobility Initiative was initiated by the Israeli government 10 years ago. We are spearheaded the efforts of 10 different ministers in the Israeli government. All my colleagues from the different ministers are here present, and we are working together as a comprehensive framework in order to achieve our goals. We got 3 different missions from the Israeli government. And the first one is to turn Israel into a center of knowledge and industrial best practices in the field of smart mobility and alternative fuels for transportation. And I will elaborate on that furthermore, but eventually it means that Israel wants to create the solutions and to export those solutions to the world. The second goal that we have is to be responsible or to coordinate the local market implementation, supporting green growth. If in the first aim, most of our tools is money and regulation, in the second goal, most of it is policy, as it was mentioned before, and regulation. The third goal is to make international collaboration with different countries, organizations, in order to promote the smart mobility revolution not only in Israel, but around the world, and to create a global change. It's not the most casual national program in Israel. Most of the governmental resolutions working mainly on the local market. In this program, there was a big vision to make a world change, and therefore we are investing a lot on international collaboration. So I've learned a lot already from the presentations that my colleagues presented before, and I won't go into details about the specific definition of what it is smart mobility, but we can imagine that there is a huge disruption. Four main pillars: the connected mobility, the electric mobility, the shared mobility, and the autonomous, are creating vast options for a change. If you think about transportation in the last 100 years, it has not changed a lot. I mean, the car stayed the same. Public transportation even is more or less, I mean, it's safer, more accurate, but underground lines, light trains, there were present 50 and 100 years ago. And the disruption, the emergence of new technologies and new business models gives us a lot of uncertainty, and that is true, and it's very hard to regulate and to make the right policy, but it gives us, for the first time in decades, a very or many opportunities to change transportation and to provide mobility, but to provide it in a safer and cleaner way. In Israel, we do invest a lot in R&D in order to achieve the first goal of the initiative. So we invested almost 2 billion shekels were allocated to research and development. And the way we do it is we invest through the funnel of innovation. So from basic and applied research, and we provided hundreds of grants for researchers. We have built 4 different centers. The last one is a national research center for smart transportation in collaboration between Bar Ilan University and the Technion. Then we invested a lot in industrial R&D, so transferring the knowledge from the academy into the industry. The third thing that we did is to create a community, and in Israel, a community means a lot. So we have around 620 startups working in the field of smart mobility and fuel alternatives, and around 10,000 people communicating with each other and working towards making the revolution real. We invested in startups, so we had the first governmental accelerator working on smart mobility. We closed it already, but let's say 8 years ago, when no one was working on that, especially, we built the first accelerator, and we had something like 40 companies growing out from there. And lastly, we have 2 pilot programs. The first one is one with the Ministry of Energy, focusing on energy and transportation, and the second one together with the Ministry of Transportation and the Israel Innovation Institute working on smart mobility. The pilots give us 2 things. First of all, of course, it gives money and some incentives to the company, but it gives us the policymakers, it gives us the ability to assess and to understand through the pilots what we need to do and to change in our regulation, and to enable us to see the deal flow of ideas and innovation acting in this field. Furthermore, in 2017, the Israeli government has passed a new governmental resolution on national plan for smart mobility. And again, the main thing was to encourage research and development, making Israel as a better site for the world. The second goal, again, was to implement or to enhance the implementation of smart technologies in Israel. The Israel National Plan for Smart Mobility encompassed 5 main things. So first of all, as I said, there's the research center in the Technion. The second thing that we do is open a lot of data sets, and we did an HD mapping project of 150 kilometers of open data, high definition, many different sensors open to the public, again, because we want to fuel up innovation in that field. The third thing that we did together with the Ministry of Transportation and the Israel Innovation Authority is the demonstration and pilots. And here you can see that maybe the starting point of the policy today, it needs to be agile and flexible. I mean, it's easy to, or not so easy, but one option is to sit and to think about the things and to wait for them to come. And then you don't know exactly how to influence them later. The second approach is to be active and to support and to help the companies to do pilots in Israel. And then while assessing the pilot, you can understand what are the outcomes and how you can create the right policy in order to harness those technology into the right outcomes that the government wants. The fourth step is a cyber test site. So we have one test site that is being operated by the Ireland company, providing companies an option to make experiments in Israel. And a second test site will be in Beersheba, focusing on cyber and automotive. The fifth and maybe the most important step is the supportive regulation. Again, new technologies, not so easy to understand what the regulation is supposed to be. And we need to understand and to make the regulation flexible. I'm happy to say that at least from the governmental perspective on the first goal, we have achieved all the targets that the government gave us. In this graph, you can see that besides the 620 Israeli startups working on that, you can see that there are many OEMs and suppliers, multinationals working in Israel. Most of them weren't here beside General Motors. So in the field, like 10 years ago, none of them were here. And mostly they're investing, doing scouting, and lastly, opening a local research and development center. And Israel has become a major player in the world in smart mobility. This graph shows the incremental volume of Israeli startup investments, both in investments and acquisitions. And it's up to date. The dark green is investments, the light green is acquisitions. And from our data, 10% of the world investments in smart mobility in the last 6 years went to Israel, and of course, that's a very good thing for the Israeli economy and the Israeli government. So policy and regulation. So we all know there are many negative externalities to transportation. Now, it's not so important. I mean, the data here is not up to date, and we can, of course, debate if air pollution is X or Y, but we all know that there are many negative externalities. In the Smart Mobility Initiative, although this workshop is focusing on green gas emissions, we look on all the externalities, not only the green gas emissions or the pollutants, but we look on accidents, congestion, parking areas, etc. And we all understand that there's in the smart mobility revolution, there is a big potential in reducing those externalities in no cost. And I agree with my former colleagues that said that smart mobility is not necessarily green, but we are here, and my governmental fellows agree with me mostly, that we're here to trying to reduce the negative externalities. The effects of the revolution are still not known, and it goes far behind transportation. Again, transportation is the easiest effect to recognize, but we know that the revolution has many different effects that we can't really capitalize yet. If you think about e-commerce, if you think about housing, where people live, where people work, how the communication will work, what will happen with the garages, what will happen with the parking lots. So there are many different effects, and it's still hard to understand exactly where the boundaries are. Challenges in implementation, and again, it's I mean the main key point here is to understand that it's still a very emerging technology. There's a lot of uncertainty ahead. So, okay, maybe today it's very clear to all of us that EVs are here to stay, but let's take it 6 years ago. We didn't know exactly what will be the situation in electric vehicles. And we all, and Felix presented these slides about micromobility, but if you go today to Tel Aviv, you'll see full tons of micromobility means in the streets. 2 years ago, they weren't there. So the pace of the technology change makes a lot of uncertainties, and we need to be agile and to be with an active approach. The second picture, of course, is the market. The market leads a lot of the technology, and with some caution, we need to help them to understand what the outcomes that we want. In the third picture, and I hope that everyone here still remember this modem from the 90s, from the early stage of the internet, but it's very hard to make as it was in the internet. So today, 30 years later, it's still not being regulated a lot, but it's very hard to do regulation from the first step, and we need to be very modest about our ability to design exactly what we think we can achieve. Two last slides about some regulation and some policy that we do. So my colleagues here are working together with me about that, of course. And regarding electrical vehicles, I think all of us are working a lot in order to implement electric vehicles in Israel. We are working mostly on public transportation, and the Ministry of Transportation is doing a great job regarding that. The plans is to have something like 50–60% out of the urban buses electric till 2026. Many challenges ahead. Regarding private car, our approach is really mostly to enable, to give the market and to give the public the ability, but not to push them before it will be economically viable. The policy regarding smart mobility as a whole, so as I said, and what we have tried to do in a project that we did last year, and you're all welcome to look on the website in Hebrew, but look at it, is first of all, try to plan the desired future. The technology is here. Technology is here. We don't know yet what will be the outcome of the technology and what technology will be emerging next year, but we need to have an open and agile discussion in order to think about the desired futures and to make the policy measures, and we have the 22 policy measures that we found in order to achieve the goal that we want. And the goal that we want is to provide mobility to all, more efficient, less expensive, greener. And we really think in the Israeli Prime Minister's office that the smart mobility revolution is a good option to provide that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for presenting your work and your projects and then the vision for the future. If Julius is still here, I mean, you talked about the problems of regulation and foreseeing the future, and I think this is exactly some of the things regarding the debate on technology openness and neutrality and what the role of the regulator should be when looking at these technologies. So it's a very complex debate. Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation. I understood from, I think are there any questions? If there are any questions, we can now do a Q&A session. I see already Fabian has a question. All right, so let's do a quick round of Q&A, and then afterwards we will move on to the next presenters. And then we can also collect questions for all of the Israeli presenters on the situation in Israel. All right, so Fabian, do you have a question?
Yes. So first of all, thank you very much for the interesting presentation, and so it's really great what you're doing right now. I would be interested in how far you integrate active mobility also in your research and in your strategies. So of course it's more technology driven as I understood it, but do you also integrate bike sharing, walking, etc. in your strategies to get a comprehensive approach?
So thank you for the question. And Eran from the Ministry of Environmental Protection will share his thought about electric vehicles share. We are not looking closely with the Smart Mobility Initiative. We are not looking closely about personal means of transportation, walkability, and urban things like that. I know when my colleagues from the Ministry of Transportation are here, they are looking on that quite heavily. And again, there are some colleagues from the Ministry of from the municipalities here, and they are working on that as well. I mean, different municipalities in Israel have plans for walkability and different and personal means of transportation, and the Ministry of Transportation has it. And our mandate is not there, but of course, when you look at the picture as a whole, you need to take that into account. And I'm not saying that there is, smart transportation and stupid transportation. And of course, you need I think the best things for all of us is to walk more, cycle more. I mean, less using private cars will be the best for all of us.
Yeah, Fabian is a researcher at Hamburg University. Also, he was a research fellow at the IPPI 2 years ago when we just launched the fellows program, and he worked at the Ministry of Environmental Protection here in Israel. There is some sort of division of labor, and I think the National Smart Mobility Initiative focuses more on the technology aspect and how to drive the Israeli industry and the technological transport ecosystem on a global scale. So it is something that is I think Daniel, you mentioned it yourself. You're more oriented to the global transport market and not necessarily only in Israel. So maybe because of that, the focus is less on bike lanes and walkability, as Daniel said. Are there any other questions for Daniel before we will move to our next presenter? All right, I'm not seeing any blue Zoom hands. So Amir, do you have any idea if we? Yeah.
Hilla asked to switch with Eran, and Eran will present first, and then Hilla will follow him.
Great. So, all right. So, Eran is head of the pollution caused by transportation, if I understood correctly, at the Ministry of Environmental Protection, and he will present 2 projects regarding electric vehicle shared electric vehicle projects in Haifa and Netanya, 2 Israeli cities, and some data about the performance of the project. Eran, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so good afternoon. My name is Eran. I want to fix my new position. It's not in the transportation department. I work as a hazardous waste coordinator, my new role. However, in my previous role in the transportation department, I worked on the project of car sharing and reducing pollution and greenhouse gas emission from transportation. But now I'm working, as I said, in hazardous waste. So if you want to talk about lithium-ion battery recycle later on and not in this scope of presentation. So as I said, I will talk about the results of the project that we founded, the ministry founded. And we also have a little bit of data about the COVID-19 impact, and we will present it here. So vehicle emissions, as you all know, are the main source of air pollution in major Israeli cities. This pollution is emitted in high populated area and does increase the risk of morbidity and mortality. One common solution is the establishment of vehicle shared system, as we learn from other places around the globe. And so basically the shared electric vehicle are a service you can rent a car for a short period of time when the collection and the return is on the user responsibility. It requires installing a mobile app in which the payment is also carried out. This technological approach is part of an attempt to move into a world of mobility as a service and a collaborative economy. The approach advocates creating a selection of public mobility options that are available for each user to choose and implement along their way. However, shared vehicle is not new to Israel. Israel kibbutzim, if you all know or familiar about it, is historically a collective settlement in which all wealth is held in common. The kibbutz used to own the cars, responsible for license and maintenance, and kibbutz members could use the car by pre-order it. The route was A to A, so the kibbutz was the starting and finish line. And it was our experience or historical vehicle sharing. So in these days, urbanization and other effects of all the people and cultural and etc. Move us to the city, and we are focusing, as we said, on reducing the pollution from the cities. The main advantage of the electric car is that it does not emit pollutant in urban area. They do, however, have indirect emissions from the power plant. However, it is still an advantage because it's not near to population, as explained. The objective of the project was to implement new EV technology and allowing access to as many as possible which are afraid of new technology and don't know how to experience new technology. And we thought about it as an opportunity to provide users or people this new technology of electric car. And we also thought about it as we said, as a mobility as a service, and our focus was to reduce car ownership and usage in private cars. And additionally, it's supposed to support the public transportation services among other mobility services as part of this mobility choices. The chosen route of this project was A to B, which means that you can take the car from point A and leave it in different position or different place. And we started the project. So the first city is Haifa. It's one of the 4 metropolises in Israel. The city nearby are actually coming to work to use the facility of this main city, and the project deployed 100 electric vehicles, over 300 parking slots, and 16 charging stations. Netanya, the other city that won the the project, has 70 cars on 210 parking slots, over 14 charging stations. Netanya is a city in the peripheral area of the north peripheral area of Gush Dan, which is actually the center of Israel. But this is the northern border of this area. Okay, so we just collected the information from the municipalities. The ministry didn't have place between the operator of the service and the municipalities. However, we did ask and wanted to get the information they provided. And the result that you show is based on their reports. At the end, just for saying, Haifa started the project fully started the project on January 2018. And Netanya started at September 2018. So the main activities that we saw on the reports that use the shared service is between 6 to 10 a.m. and 3 to 7 p.m. The average ride, the minutes of the ride were 20 minutes, and the car was driving 60 minutes per day. Only 1 hour a day, the car is operated and used in this service. Something very, really, I don't know if it's surprising, but it really has a strong effect, is that in the end of 2019, around 5,030 users were joined the service. However, in average, only 37% of them actually use the service. So, and it gives us a really strong, let's erase that last sentence. As in average, 7,500 rides per month. And the filling factor of a car is 1.5, which is basically said that how many passengers are in the car in one ride. So just for comparison, the filling factor of private car is 1.2, and in this service, it's better. Oh, sorry. Every 6 months, the municipality had to carry a user survey in which the question was the same along all the period of time. And they provided a very interesting result, as we see it, before joining the shared services, 40% of the users use the private car. Just want to say that actually not only, 20% of all registered users answer the survey. So for us, it can provide acute data or relative acute data. And before the service, 36% of the user use the public transportation. Now, after they use the project, after use the service, we saw the 32% in average decided to use less public transportation, and also 8% in average reported increase in the usage. This result, however, is not positive to the project, as our objective is to fully complete the service for public transportation. However, we believe that with the right adjustment, the service can fully complete public transportation and even be better in the future, but we will talk about it later. In graph number 3 and 4, 30% reported less use of their private car, and even will consider not to buy a new car as they join the service. But just for saying that, from the survey, they said that they will give up only the second car and not the first car that they already have. But it is a positive effect of the project, because even though it's a second car, it's still a car that is not joining the road and emitting pollution, etc., etc. The COVID-19 outbreak has affected the service as it has many other aspects in our life. General reduction on the service activity were reported, and 23% reduction in general user registered to the service, and only 22% actually use the service. And we also reported a reduction in minutes per ride, which reduced 12%. We don't see it here, but we see that the overall usage of car per day was reduced from 1 hour to half an hour. However, during lockdown, the public transportation was shut down. However, the shared service was still activated, offering users to use the cars whenever they need or for any reason. This supports the necessity of complete mobility service that support public transportation, in our opinion. So, to conclude, we saw that many users experience new and simple EV technology. I didn't say it before, but based on the survey, the age of the use of the service was really not for all the ages, actually, not any specific range of age. So all the young and the others use the services. And for our perspective, it's that it is exposed to this new technology. As I said, car ownership and usage, mainly the second car reduce, which is positively affect. And because of the reduction of using public transportation, we see it as a negative effect of the project. But as I said before, there is the possibility to do the right adjustment and to improve it. New project to our recommendation on this project, and if you can see it in this picture, this is Amir experiencing the service. And the new project should improve car filling factor at shared vehicle service. Actually, this is one of the most important recommendations, that if we will increase the filling factor, the service, in our opinion, will be much more effective, and it can serve many people more. And as we said, it can be complementary to the public transportation. But we see it as a big for our future project, and we can need to consider it, of course, but the filling factor is important, and many passengers in this car will be very effective in our perspective. And as we said, we need to developing a mechanism to improve the support of public transportation. And as all the charging stations should be held by the municipality in which the service is deployed. I don't know if it's common or there is a different contract between the operator and the municipalities, but we thought about it as it's really important, because once or for any reason the service is not fulfill his destiny, the charging station will serve the city and should be, as we said, owned by the municipality. And this is something that we learned in the end of the project, or in the middle of the project, that the data that those operators collected in the municipalities, the raw data, the algorithm that collect all the data, should be a public, free to public access. But because we didn't were responsible between the contract between the municipality and the operator, we didn't ask for this information. However, we did come across with researchers that said, I have an algorithm that I want to develop. I'm from the university. It will be for the benefits of all, and I agree. However, we didn't have the chance, or we didn't have the ability to provide him or them the raw data. And this is a big recommendation, that in any project, regardless if it will be transportation or so, but any collecting data technology that you are going to implement by using public money, the data should be served and free for access to all whom ask to use it for his purposes. So the project was founded by Keren Kayemet Israel and the Smart Mobility Initiative at the Prime Minister Office, and was carried by the Environmental Protection Ministry. Thank you very much for listening, and Q&A if you have.
Thank you very much, Eran, for presenting the outcomes of this project. I would be interested in hearing where you identify how you see the road ahead from here. What are your key takeaways and the gaps to mainstreaming this project? So where the main barriers remain from your perspective? I mean, I guess there are a bunch of them, as we saw in all the previous presentations. But to see that it doesn't remain an isolated project, and where are the key barriers that you think that should be addressed? That would be interesting for me personally to hear. Otherwise, if there are any other questions, feel free to raise your hand. I see Gil has a question. So maybe we'll start with Gil, and then if you want Eran afterwards to also address the question that I had, would be great. Yes, Gil.
Thank you, Eran. I wanted to know whether you check or take into consideration any changes in congestion, and also emissions, because if we follow on the first presentation, that sometimes without limitations to private vehicles in cities, actually what happens, as your data actually shows, people change their mode of transportation from public transport and actually increase the number of vehicles in the city and maybe the congestion and also emissions. So do you check it, or do you plan to do it in the future? So this is one question. And the second one is that in the recommendations, you mentioned that for the future of the project or other projects, you recommend some sort of measures or considerations about how to supplement public transportation, but what are actually your recommendations on how to do it? So this is my question.
Yeah, thank you. Eran, do you want to respond?
I think that I lost only the last part of the question, but
I
in
can
our
repeat
opinion,
if you want. Yeah, I can just repeat.
It's in my opinion, actually.
Okay.
Actually, it's my opinion, not our. The mobile app that supports the service should do the right adjustment for people who traveling from different city to traveling in Haifa actually, or Netanya, and I don't know, maybe to connect them together and find the routes that is near public transportation stations and other area of service in the city. But as we learn from this project, and once again, this is my opinion, and the historical aspect of Israel using the kibbutzim, maybe the right thing to do is to shift all these services of shared services to the moatzot ezoriyot, local authorities, the kibbutzim, the small settlements, which actually in the past, they used the same services. But now we need to do it with the right adjustment and the right purposes, but still in this settlement, they can use the cars by demand, and it's work there. So maybe we should do the right adjustment and let them use this service rather than in the city that we saw not that effective at this current time. But that's it. Maybe the next startup can, I don't know, find the solution for connectivity with public transportation, and in my opinion, of course.
Thank you. Gil, do you want to maybe touch on the first part of your question again?
I think I know the answer, but I'm still gonna ask it. Did you check the influence on congestion and also emissions from the project? Because, without limiting private car usage in terms of parking and lanes, we see the results as you presented, and also other speakers, that it actually can be a downside. So did you check it? Do you have data on that?
Yeah, but as I explained, the data, as we got the data, it wasn't efficient enough to find the correlation or to find how much pollution it reduced, but we can use we thought about taking all the rides per month in average, 77,500 rides per month, and compare it to the emission factors of the EV cars and the other cars. But as I explained, we didn't have much data to be said that, okay, this is the actual number, and we didn't do it.
Great. Okay. Thank you for the answer, Eran.
Okay, thank you very much. And as I said, if you want to talk about hazardous waste, lithium-ion battery, you have the email in my presentation, and I will be delightful to answer as much as I can.
I see that we have another question from Batchen. Is
Hi.
your question for Eran?
Yes, the question for Eran, if we have time. Batchen Nachmias, assistant professor at Ariel University. I have a question for you. If you, maybe you presented it at the very beginning and I just missed it. Did you experience or interfere with the actually business model of Car2Go? Did you try different structure of costs for the service? Maybe it's not just the acceptance issue of the shared ride. Maybe it's a matter of the cost structure, because I would agree that this specific service is particularly maybe will be useful in smaller areas like villages, kibbutz, and so on. But it was tested in Technion, for example, a couple of years back, and it was not successful. So I'm just trying to see what you think about this kind of.
Yeah, so I want to add that using car sharing services, it's really complicated because you need to change your behavior as we thought about it. And this is actually the first obstacle, how to change your thinking line as mobility as a service. It's not, and not owning the car and the private cars, of course. Of course, the business model has also effect on the users, of course. But we didn't decide how much to take or how much it will cost, because we didn't want to enter that area. We thought about that each city can adjust this service for its own purposes. However, we did have a limit cost for ride. It's like 1.2 shekels per minute, if I remember correctly, but I need to check the numbers, but I know that there has a limit. Actually, now that once I used also the services, the shared car service, and as I thought about it, actually paying for the real cost of transportation, and but we didn't. It's not in the scope of this work, but this is my personal experience. And I don't know if it's the right move to reduce the amount of the service. Maybe in other services there it will be good, but this eventually it's still a car on the road, but if it will be fully complete the public transportation, it will be okay and good for our purposes, but it still need to pay the exact price, in my opinion.
Okay, just a suggestion, then you could have tested the, to incentivize the first and last mile, because you wanted to complete public transportation. Maybe this is the place to interfere the cost. Or
I just want to add something about the incentive. Netanya, in the Netanya municipality, at the months of July and August 2019, the operator have subsidized 100 shekel per user to use the car. Maybe I can show you in the presentation if we have still time. If not, but you can see a spike I didn't enter this graph, but we did saw a spike on usage time from 60 minutes to 110 minutes per car a day. The usage was still, the ride duration was still 20 minutes. However, the time that the used car was increased. We did saw it, but our 100 shekel every month that give us a subsidized. I don't know if there is the right business model that can support it at this moment.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eran. We are now out of time for this session. Thank you very much for the presentation and for all the answering the questions and for everybody who asked questions. Now I would like to move to Hilla Haddad from Netivei Israel. And just a second. Hello. This is Hilla, and Hilla will present you shortly so that all the people know who you are. So Hilla Haddad is VP Strategy and Innovation at Netivei Israel, which is the national transport infrastructure company in Israel, since the beginning of this year. So probably your first year in the job looked a bit different than how you imagined when you entered it. She's an aerospace engineer, graduated from the Technion, and before starting to work for Netivei Israel, she worked as a test manager for the Israeli Air Force, as a project manager at the Israeli Ministry of Defense, and at the Israeli Ministry of Transport as head of projects administration. And Hilla will tell us a bit about the vision of Netivei Israel in the context of smart mobility and shed light on some of the main projects that are underway. So Hilla, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank you for the invitation to come and speak here. I will try to explain how Netivei Israel, which the Israelis here knew as the private car company, as you can say, which is in charge of the interurban roads. How we managed to work for smart mobility and having a better future with our sviva, with our, sorry for the English. I will start with a short movie. I hope it will work about the company, and you can hear it.
We can, if you can start it again, we will see. I hope there's no feedback loop. Sometimes it's a problem streaming videos on the Zoom.
National Transport Infrastructure Company of Israel is a government-owned company. We are the owners of about 8,600 kilometers for interurban roads and highways in Israel. In charge of design and construction of new interurban roads and highways in Israel. And since 2012, of all new railroads in the country. Furthermore, we are in charge of design and construction of the International Airport of Israel, supplementary to Ben Gurion International Airport, which is the main aerial gate to Israel. Today, we're in our third five-year plan, and our budget for this period is $14.2 billion US. The major topics in our work plan include development of interurban road network according to state master plan, construction of new railroads, maintenance of the road network, supporting development of public transport system, improvement of safety on roads, development of intermodality transport plan, pedestrian, cycling, cars, and public transportation, advanced solutions for cooperative intelligent traffic system, airport planning, design, and construction, and of course, R&D regarding all of the above. Last year, the company established a new division, Strategy and Innovation. This division promotes, among other things, R&D processes and leads a roadmap for acceleration of advanced technologies and methods, which will allow us to step up our game and deal with new challenges that the transport infrastructure sector is facing. At the Strategy and Innovation Division, we are looking for partners to join venture.
I think it's enough for now. as was mentioned in the movie, Netivei Israel decided in the beginning of this year to establish this division and start building strategies, programs of how the road network and the train network, how Netivei Israel can make it more efficient for the usage and efficient for the environment, and to understand what is our role in all these changes that happens around us and in the transportation sector. So I'll try to focus on three programs, pilots that we have, or three projects that we have in this day. So first of them, it's not what we usually call smart mobility, but it's the base infrastructure to enable it. We are transforming all our road street lights into new lights, which will be LED. In one way, it will help us to save the usage of electricity, but the other big things that it will enable us to put a 4G on each light, this will be the baseline to enable connectivity between cars, and in our scope, connectivity between trucks. The transportation of goods and cargo is a big issue when you look into the interurban roads, and we try to find ways how to make it more effective. In Israel, the efficiency of the truck travels is not good enough. We have a lot of trucks that going around empty because the infrastructures don't let them good infrastructures to maintain it better and to make it more effective. So we deal with this issue a lot in the aspect of smart mobility. We're working towards platooning. We really want to see a truck platooning happening in Israel. In a difference from the private cars, the autonomous private cars or public buses, autonomous public shuttles or buses, to enable platooning in trucks, the infrastructure is a big issue, and the infrastructure manager has a big role in order to enable it. We are now far ahead of the European in this area, and in the US is also they are also more advanced than us, and we're trying to close this gap in order to see platooning cars in Israel, mainly in the southern and northern roads. It will be better in aspects of environment. It will be better in aspects of safety, of road safety. Trucks are a part of a lot of car accidents in Israel, and it's a big issue that we're dealing with. Another topic that we have on our table in an aspect of how to have the environment issues is how we use our huge land areas in order to produce energy using clean and renewable energies. How can we use our interchanges land or a side of the road lands in order to use to put the solar system or wind turbines to help Israel to get to their aims in renewable energies. And the another thing that I think you will be interested in this discussion is how can we use more recycled materials inside the roads infrastructure. How can we do a circular economy? We have a lot of roads that we need to renewable once at a time, and we need to make it more effective using this recycled sources. I think I will stop here, and I will be very happy to hear your questions about Netivei Israel and Aruch and its role in this area.
Great, thank you very much, Hilla, for providing this overview of some of the projects. I see that Amir already has a question. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or type them in the chat. Yes, Amir.
Hi, Hilla. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to ask a question. Netivei Israel, as much as I know, is the biggest infrastructure company within the transport sector. And, you know, for years it was considered as the road company. And even today, when I look at your video, at your movie, the first thing you see is all those big roads and interchanges and everything. And, you know, today the world is changing, and everyone here talk about accessibility. And my question is, how does Netivei Israel consider itself, and do you still consider yourself as a road company, or maybe as a governmental company that should offer solutions to improve mobility and even more accessibility to the public? Because when you say, for example, the platooning example that you gave, this is a perfect example of how you, as a company that has tremendous power and a lot of, you know, very good company that can give very good results, you can do a big change in the roads. So my question is, how do you consider yourself? Do you still consider yourself as a road company? It's a large question.
We consider ourselves as an infrastructure company, and we think that our role is to enable people and cargo going from one place to another at the most effective and efficient way. Even though inside the metropolitan areas, we all hope together that Israel is finally going to the place she should go. It should go by preferring public transportation and building light rails and trains. A country should have a road system, a good road system, as I said, mainly for enabling economy to grow, and for cargo and goods. Even in Switzerland, which have a very good train system, and I think no one will argue that, only 30% of the cargo is going by train, because this is how economy works. So people should go whatever it can on public transportation, and then the roads should enable the economy to grow, mainly by letting the trucks go around effectively and not empty. And Netivei Israel has a very big role in this area. I have to say, Netivei Israel will not. It's not the role of Netivei Israel to do shuttles or to run buses. I think we have enough bodies or gufim and enough bodies that in charge of it in Israel, and they should do their work. Maybe they can do it better, but I think they are going in this way, and it's not our role to do it. But in this aspect, we have a very big, in the interurban roads, we still have more than 3,000 bus stations. And if you want a person to go by bus, it should be very easy and very convenient to do it. So we have a big project of making our bus stations more accessible, more nice to wait. Today there is not enough light and you don't have enough shade. And we have a very big pilot program running now with using Moveit data to increase the accessibility of the road of the bus station in our road system. But Netivei Israel main role is not in the metropolitan area, and I think that is why we are still mainly doing roads, and it's okay. And we're doing a lot of trains. But yes, we are an infrastructure company, and we need to do a good roads. You know, I always look at the Back to the Future movie. When they say roads, where we going, we don't need roads. So we still need roads. We need to do it safe and lighted and accessible, and whatever it needs to give the public transportation advance, we need to do it.
Hilla, thank you very much for this input. We have some questions from the audience. I would be interested. I think you were not here yet when we had our first presentation, but the first presentation focused on the gap between smart mobility and sustainable mobility, that innovative infrastructure, innovative technologies for transport do not necessarily lead to sustainable outcomes. And when you're talking about the future, about laying infrastructure for more efficient and more effective transport, what are your parameters that goods and people move faster from point A to point B, that it's more convenient? How do you think about it?
You cannot speak about goods and person in the same, it's not the same aim. If you talk about the people who will use the system, it should be more convenient, more safe. This is how you measure if you are doing well in this area. In goods, it's mainly more effective. Effective, it means that the less empty runs, less time standing on congestion. Trucks standing on congestion, it's bad for the environment and it's bad for the economy. So you need to handle it, not because it's not convenient for the driver to stand there, but you need to handle it because the goods that he's bringing to the shop is cost more because he stand there, and the solutions are different between the goods and the people. So we look in these two different glasses, as I said. In this, it's a very big difference between these two issues. Mm-hmm. And I think that sustainable is also how you build your roads and your infrastructure. It's a very big issue. We put a lot of money, raw materials into the infrastructure, even if they are public transportation infrastructure or train infrastructure. It's still, you should recycle materials and use that, and you cannot use new raw materials all the time. And this is also a big issue that we're dealing with, how we can really make it sustainable and using our roads materials again and again.
Yeah, Felix mentioned in the first presentation that the amount of cars is going to climb in a very steep way, and talking about, sorry?
Even if we are very, very optimistic about going to about moving people to trains and to buses, by 2040, in Israel, there are going to be 17 million people. It means that the car number will double itself till then.
Does it have to be this way? Can't you say, as the main roads company, can't you say that you will not?
No, we need. If we'll be very good, it will just double and not triple. Because even if you look about the countries in the world which their public transportation is amazing, still almost every household have one car. You still have peripheral area. There, you still have places that you don't want as a country to subsidize the public transportation. Let's say I want to go to, you want me as a people who live next to Tel Aviv not to use my car to go to work every day. It's okay, you can do it. But I still need to go to visit my grandma in Yerucham. So, and this, in this travel, the country doesn't want to subsidize it by public transportation. It's not efficient. So if we'll be very good, we will just double the car number. But if the public transportation will not be good, we will triple it.
If I may add something, we just now finished the 2050 project, the transportation team, together with the MOT, and we did some projections for 2050. And even at the best scenario, you know, the most ambitious scenario, we're talking about if today, let's say we're 3.5, 3.7 million vehicles, the best scenario, the most ambitious one is 5.5 million vehicles. And this is the best scenario that the MOT and ourselves can predict. So I don't know what it means. It means maybe that these are the facts. You know, we have a low motorization rate. We are a country that still grows. Maybe these are the facts. Or maybe we should do some change, you know, to change the way we think, because at least according to all models that I know, the motorization rate will go up, the population growth will go up, and we will have more vehicles.
In my thoughts, I think you should aim to that the 5.5 million cars which will be here, they will be here, will not go around all the time. And they will, and people will use it in the right hours and places where you can deal with it. As I said, in the more peripheral area, in their unique usage of the cars, going somewhere which is not their daily work. I think we should speak at this in this terms and not about just the number of the cars, because we can have 2 million, 3 million like today, but if today, in order to go 10 kilometers every day, the same 10 kilometers from my home to my workplace, so this is wrong. There is no problem with the usage of the car on Friday night when I'm going to my parents' home to eat Saturday dinners. So it's not black and white.
All right. Thank you for this input. Gil, you had a question?
Yes, hi, Hilla.
Hi, Gil.
I wanted to ask if you have any changes following COVID-19 and Zoom, you know, the working remotely. This is the first question because it can have a massive influence on the way people, you know, use their cars or not use their cars.
Saturday, we had a very big research of how COVID changes the way we use changes the way people use our road system. And we can see a few vectors. First, we see that people less use the public transportation. People scared for their health and they use it less. But we can see that there is a big moving to bicycles and motorbike. We can see people driving bicycles in roads that we didn't see them before, even in the interurban area, and not just inside the cities like we used to see them in Tel Aviv roads, but we see them in, let's say, a semi-metropolitan areas. And if until the COVID, we have for already few years, we have in every road, in every new road or a road that we know renewable in our system, we have bicycle lane. But we see that during the COVID, we need to do just the bicycle lane and not the main project of building the road. And we are discussing it today with the ministry. We can see that electrical car will be a main issue. EVs will be a main issue for us in the next 2 to 3 years, because we can see that in Europe now the EV get very boosted because of the COVID, and we expect to see a lot more EV cars in Israel. And we understand that in the interurban roads there is a failure point, because again, if you are working somewhere, you will have a charger in your home, and you will have a charger in your office. But when you want to go travel to the Kinneret on Saturday, you will need to have a charger point in the interurban road somewhere. And we are now exploring it and try to understand what we should do with this issue. And what COVID again?
Okay. Tודה. I have another question.
There is less traffic all around.
So maybe we need less roads following COVID-19.
Maybe we need less roads. Maybe we need less roads. It depends where.
This is a good point and a good segue, I think, into the final part of our event today. Hilla, first of all, just because we're a bit short on the time, it's very insightful. So thank you very much, first of all, for the presentation and for taking the time. I would like to invite you to also ask Hilla more questions, but maybe also engage in a more open discussion so that everybody can participate. And I mean, we had a lot of interesting input today. And when I listen to everybody speaks, it's interesting to see how everything is coming together. The question really is how we take all of these points and think how to move forward from here. So Amir, who co-organized the workshop with us, I would like to offer you to moderate an open discussion now, so that we can hear from everybody their thoughts and about what we heard today.
Okay, thank you. So let me go just real briefly on what we talked today. So Felix actually showed us some very surprising results, at least on my part, that shared mobility isn't always good for the society in Israel. And sometimes even, when you put 4 people in a car, it's better than public transportation. And sometimes a shared scooter is less good for the society rather than a privately owned one. So I think those insights, we should think about them. I think this is something that we should all think about and decide as policymakers, as those of us that take part in the decision, to think what we want to do here in Israel and what we should incentivize and what we shouldn't incentivize. Later on, Julius talked about the technology neutrality, and I think this is an important point, because we're always thinking about technology, and we're thinking that this technology or that technology can give us the solution, and we're all going to this direction. But I think the smart thing to do is to look at the outcome, the results of the technology, and to promote those results. We don't want autonomous vehicles just because they're autonomous. We don't want smart mobility just because it's smart. We don't care if it's smart or it's stupid. We want to reduce congestion. We want to reduce emissions. We want to reduce accidents, etc. And the technology, it's just a way to do it. And this is the right thing to look at. When you consider technologies, I think this is the right way to look at it. Later on, Daniel shared with us smart mobility strategy for Israel from the PMO's perspective, and Israel is definitely working very hard on it. But I think that the main work is looking outside of Israel, at working with startup companies and investments, and less work inside Israel. And this is something that maybe we should give some thoughts on how to improve it. Eran, I think, gave the perfect example of the Car2Go shared EV project, of how things are complex. Because on one hand, I think that the government and the authorities should give space for this kind of initiatives, because not everyone, everywhere, anytime can use public transportation. So maybe they should have some other alternatives. But the role of the government and the local and the central government is to conduct and to build this kind of projects in a way that is better for the society. So we learned some lessons there, what we should and we shouldn't do. And I hope that we can implement them, not only for this specific project, which I'm not sure how far will it continue, but to other projects as well. And finally, Hilla shared with us the work of Netivei Israel. And it does a lot of work now on sustainability. But at least for my part, I think there is still much place to do some sort of a switch in the way that the company sees itself as the way that the government considers the company, because this kind of processes it's not necessarily has to start within the company, but to work more on solutions to accessibility rather than always to build more infrastructure, even though it is an infrastructure company. And infrastructure is the basis for smart mobility, and we hardly discussed about it, but you cannot do smart mobility without the relevant infrastructure. So there are so many insights today, and I would like to open the discussion and hear you. And I have just one leading question, and I hope you can address it. And I would like to know what policies in Israel, policies for the central government or for the local municipalities today are not constructed well enough in order to decarbonize transport, in order to promote sustainability. And I'm talking not only about the obvious policies that are harmful, but I'm talking about the policies that we consider them as sustainable policies, but following today's discussion, we might think about them a little bit different. So if anyone would like to share his thoughts about it with us, I will be happy. You can raise your hand if you want to speak, or just open your mic. No one.
I can.
Yes.
Well,
my thoughts, unless someone else.
Well, Gil, it's Marla. I have a general question about, among other things, I work as a tour guide, and when COVID ends, we were at peak tourism, 4 million plus. And the transportation around tourism is a whole other set of infrastructure that wasn't addressed here. And I'm wondering what policy should be towards tourism transportation infrastructure. And is any government entity dealing with this? I'm not sure the Ministry of Tourism is. So how is the Ministry of Transportation dealing with it?
Marla, if I can add to what you say, we saw, as I said, the research of the COVID, we saw that because Israeli doesn't go nowhere else and they all stay in Israel, we see a very big change of how we use the roads in
I'm talking about incoming tourists. I'm talking about
I understand, but
it's
lightened us. The tourism is another very big issue that we should deal with. I think that we need to, as you said, to dialogue with the tourism ministry, because even what we see in the COVID, that the roads which leads to the tourist places, they are not able to deal with a lot of traffic, not because of congestion there, because of safety, mainly because of safety. And there, if I will, as Amir said, if there is a role, the ministry should decide if it's our role or someone else's role to deal and to find better tourist transportation solutions specific to these places. So the COVID just lightened this problem.
Which ministry? The Ministry of Tourism or Transportation?
I think that the Ministry of Transportation, in my view, but I think they should collaborate with the Ministry of Tourism. And
how do you propose that they should collaborate? Because in Jerusalem, they don't collaborate well.
At least from my perspective, as someone who works in the ministry, if I was the Ministry of Tourism, I would talk to the MOT and show them what are the needs. What are the needs for tourists in Israel? What are the projections? And once that the MOT will understand what is the demand, they can start thinking about what to do to offer solutions for this demand. So I think that this is something that should start from the Ministry of Tourism. Okay, I hope, Marla, that you get some answers. Anyone else would like to comment or ask questions?
I mean, we talked about it. Maybe I will just throw it in the round, as I understand that there is quite a consensus in Israel. But one of the benefits of this international dialogue is that you can see the particularities of Israel. You know, what are the advantages of Israel? What are the disadvantages? And you can juxtapose it with different places. In Germany, one of the big problems that are like one of the main barriers to reduce the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions in the transport sector, is a very, very robust and powerful, influential automotive industry. No need to go like Daimler and BMW and Volkswagen, like all of these automotive giants that are just invested. The whole country is invested in private vehicles, but Israel doesn't have such an industry. Israel is much smaller. Hilla said about going to Yerucham to her family, but I mean, if we look at the massive scale, like the majority of the people, how many people have to go to Tveria and to Yerucham? Some, of course, but how many have to take these trips? And also these distances, they're not very big in comparison with other countries. So I would think that Israel is actually well positioned to get to diminish the dependency on private vehicles. Where are the barriers? Why is everybody talking about, like tripling or doubling the amount of private cars, where everybody is suffocating under congestion in Israel, as if it's a natural law, as if there's nothing that policy can do against it? So I would be happy to hear, I think it goes to everybody here, these questions, but I would be very interested to hear, because there's so many downsides to private vehicles. and like nobody's like, why can't we do something more radical?
And I know I think it's definitely worth the discussion, because everyone from the policy side, I mean from the government side, are definitely under the impression that the majority of the trips today are by private vehicles. And even if you look ahead 20 to 30 years, we're talking about a split of 60% towards public transportation or something like this. So definitely all projections indicate that we're looking to private vehicles will remain one of the most important solutions for mobility. And I don't know if it is, if this is a natural law, if it has to be. But if you look at European countries, at Western countries, and if you look, for example, at the population and the motorization rate, and you think that they are today where we want to be, I don't know, 10 to 20 years ahead, so you will have more cars here. I don't know. So it's something that warrants discussion, because everyone thinks like this.
Yeah. Sorry.
I have a question, maybe a follow-up on the same discussion. I know that there is like a new tool developed by people like Nir Sharav and maybe others to estimate projects, also infrastructure projects on transportation. And the goals that they put in the system for evaluating is 30% private vehicles and 70% all the rest by I think it was 2040, if I'm not mistaken. But do you actually use this tool, Hilla?
We use these tools, but they are focusing, again, they are focusing on the metropolitan areas, and then in the demand map regarding daily usage of the car, daily going home to work, and such usage of the car. They don't take in account tourism, not inside and not outside. They're not taking into account a non-daily usage of people. The demands map take in account the daily work.
Okay. Because I think the main issue, like you mentioned, is that everyone is really talking about creating alternatives and investing more maybe in public transport and other modes and technologies, but actually talking about how to reduce parking and how to, reduce lanes also for private vehicles, and how to give the local authorities the power and also the tools and maybe also the mandatory obligation to do it is not really the focus on the conversation, and that's why all the predictions are not optimistic.
And again, you should reduce parking and reduce lanes in order that the bus will be better solution than the private car while going to the center of Tel Aviv. It's not supposed to be that the easiest and fastest way to go to Tel Aviv, to Haifa, to Jerusalem will be by private car.
Yeah.
I think and this is what Nir Sharav is mainly focused on.
I'm just saying there's a big difference between the should, this is what we should do, and if we look at the practical steps.
I think that also in the practical acts, we are there. Infrastructure are not building but within a day. But I think if you see where, I think that today the government put the money where their mouth is. All our projects, if they are not going to this aim, we don't get the money to do it. So I think that the government is already there, but it's not the only thing you should do. You have some other, in order to build the metro, you should bring raw materials from the southern of Israel. If there will be not enough roads to do it, you will not be able to build a metro. So what will you do?
It doesn't seem like there is a decision to build the metro yet, by the way. So
to build the green line of the light rail in Tel Aviv, it's the same.
We can make life much easier if we just use data. And I'm amazed that you were talking about data. I think it was Eran who talked about data. Are there any specifications for minimal information, minimum data that we can get from any of the entities in this landscape?
In that regard, maybe, Ronit, I don't know if you're familiar with the previous paper that we published on an integrated data platform that suggests a way forward on how to...
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So Daniel from the Smart Mobility Initiative is not here anymore. Essentially, the paper that we launched in March this year was the first milestone in the roadmap of the Prime Minister's office on how to integrate data collected from the different data collectors, private sector, government, municipalities, everybody. I understand that it's a very ambitious project, and to be fair, I think Felix has also had to catch a flight, but I think there is no precedent for such an ambitious project somewhere else. So it's quite ambitious, but I think it's these people are thinking about it. I don't know, maybe I understand that it's more fragmented, the data landscape, and when it's fragmented, then there is no integrative planning. So probably.
And Netivei Israel is doing a very big project today of gathering the data. The data is around in a lot of places. We have a very big project with the ministry of gathering this data into one database where you should when you can decide things about regarding actual data.
But it shouldn't be centralized. It should be decentralized and integrated.
Should be. It's not should be centralized. It should be
one database.
Mungash.
Okay.
Made accessible.
Okay. You should make it accessible, and this is the project. Is not to centralize it, but to understand where it is, who owns it, what you should do in order to make it accessible, and to make it understandable. So everyone which getting this data will understand what it means in the same way, and not everything will look at the same number and understand it differently. So we're mapping.
The data that you're referring to is data collected by Netivei Israel and not only.
Not normally. It's data that we collect. It's data that we are buying. As I said, we have a big pilot with MoveIt. We are discussing with Eran, Pointer, and such companies which have data about the trucks data. We are gathering in our system the data from the Ravkav and etc. to understand how you can
and how do you
make it more accessible.
How do you choose with him to go? For example, the scooters or Google Maps.
We speak with everyone who we think we have data and is want to speak with us. So we speak with Waze, with Bird, with every company which we think has a relevant data, and we can get it. We understand if that maybe we as a government-owned company, we as a government should buy it and make it accessible to other companies. So we are dealing with it very intensively.
We have a question from, Felix Wagner has a question. And just a quick question before Felix, before I give you the floor. Hilla, who should own this database that you're building with all the different?
The government. if it's the Prime Minister office or the ministry, or I don't know how.
And will it be completely open, or how will it be?
I think it should. I think it should be open.
Is there a decision on this, or like?
It's not decided yet specifically, but I can tell you that we are already open. Every data we buy, we reflect it to we put it in our website and make it accessible to everyone who wants to use it. But we still have let's say Waze. I can get all the data from Waze, but I have an agreement with them that I cannot bring it to a third because it's their
it's proprietary data. Yeah. Okay, this is it's a big subject. We're working on this. It's interesting for us. We would be happy to continue the conversation with you on this. For now, Felix, you had a question?
Yeah, just to quickly introduce myself, I'm a PhD student in Felix Creutzig's group, so at MCC. And just maybe to touch on the data topic, I think in the context of transport, it's a bit more complex, I guess, because like whenever it comes to mobility data, it's also very, like personal related, so you can kind of trace it back to individuals. So I'm not quite sure how it's done in Israel, but at least in Germany, there are like huge discussions about those kind of topics because data privacy is kind of like a huge topic, and it's like very, very difficult actually. And I also wanted to touch on the first question Amir raised, where you kind of said, well, Israel wants to be there or will be there where Western countries are already in like 20 years or something. And I would kind of see this maybe as an opportunity to not make maybe the same mistakes and just use smart mobility and kind of maybe focus on the points Felix has mentioned, that, for example, no one is actually really focused on increasing the occupancy in vehicles. So thinking about how can we create incentives to maybe use smart technology in order to raise occupancy instead of creating more smart mobility solutions that actually don't have an impact on greenhouse gas emissions. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that this might be more like an opportunity instead of that's the way we will go and we cannot change it in the future.
Absolutely, I agree with both points. The first point, we also have a discussion in Israel, and Tamara Lev, that just a few minutes ago left the session. She's from the Ministry of Justice, and she deals with those issues of how you keep the privacy of the people when you connect all this data. So there is a big discussion in Israel also about it. So this is the first point. And the other thing is, I agree, if you put more people in a car, it doesn't mean it's the best solution. You don't need more infrastructure. You don't need investments of billions of shekels. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a smart solution to put more people in a vehicle. It can be other solutions, I don't know. And sometimes if I don't know, so I know that some of the bus lanes in Israel are HOV lanes now, and hopefully more of them will be like this. So this is something that the government definitely should work on, and I agree, we shouldn't do the same mistakes other did, definitely so, yes. So if there are no other questions, I think Oz, I'll move it back to you to summarize and finish with the workshop. Okay.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Amir, for summarizing all the input that we received today. I think it was packed, but thank you very much for all the participants. I personally thought that it was all super relevant and complementary, and also seeing the different perspectives from government, from you, Hilla, as a government company, which is somebody in the field that is actually doing things, from academia. We had some very interesting data from the case study that Eran presented, and from the research that Felix showed us in the beginning. Also a bit about the foresight and the vision that Daniel presented. So it seems like there's a lot of trial and error going on, a lot of different initiatives and a lot of different actors pulling in different directions. For me personally, I think that Felix's paper, I think the main contribution there, that it really broke down through the lens of the decarbonization aspect, looking at smart mobility and demystifying it, showing all of these counterintuitive findings. I think now the idea or the main challenge or the main task at hand is to take the input from this workshop and translate it into concrete directions or action items. And to that end, I will just say that we, in the context of this workshop, we will finish working on the paper soon, and then we will disseminate it around. We will also translate it to Hebrew so that it's accessible as possible. We will make an executive summary so that really the messages are communicated in the clearest way possible. And of course, Hilla, Amir, Eran, Gil, everybody here that is interested and can help with disseminating the findings would be great. I would then repeat what I said in the beginning, that this was the third workshop focusing on transport. We had two others on climate legislation and carbon tax. There was an article in Globes just a few days ago on the carbon tax workshop that we had. So if you're interested, you can send it around. We will keep this work going on next year, and we will be very happy to continue working with you together based on the new insight that we had from these workshops. If you are interested in joining our efforts in this project, feel free to be in touch with either me or Polina, and we will, of course, be happy to think of ways how we can continue the cooperation. Thank you again from our side to everybody that contributed. We thought it was really successful, and we hope to be in touch soon.